again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the scariest 100% true story that you've heard of? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My uncle was in a bar one night and started talking to this random guy. He described him as a really nice guy. He met him a few other times in the same bar. They drank and talked about random stuff. Soon after, my uncle stopped seeing the guy at the bar. I don't know how long after, but my uncle got notified that he had jury duty. He showed up and found out what it was for. A serial killer, and the killer was his friend from the bar, Derek Todd Lee. My uncle was promptly dismissed from jury duty for obvious reasons. Every Orphan Source report from the IAEA is terrifying and well documented with pictures. One of the most horrifying is the Guyana accident in 1987. For those who don't know, an Orphan Source accident is when radioactive material that had been lost, usually from an abandoned hospital, is discovered by people unaware of the danger who inadvertently expose themselves and others to lethal and or permanently disfiguring doses of radiation. You read in horror as survivors describe people inviting their neighbors to see the oddity they found and share samples, children playing with the sparkly dust, all unaware that they have just doomed themselves. Acute radiation exposure is a truly nightmarish way to die. Your flesh rots away over months while skin grafts are ineffective. You deteriorate in pain in the hospital until you die of infection or necrosis. I work midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner, the other half of the week, and we've always been partners. So these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly, and as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay as he walked in. He smiled and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You, small girl, is not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to. And the provincial police, think state troopers if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s and early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours, and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine that he fell asleep, to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing, and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all of the oil and let him in because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back. So the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life. I don't work at the station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are." One of my friend's family growing up had a beach house, and I'd get invited every now and then. They had money, and the house was massive. Pretty cool place, too. They even had a full-time maid who had her own flat at the back. One day, they go there for a long weekend, and when they opened the door, the place had been ransacked. It was all a mess. Missing TVs, furniture, broken stuff, you get the picture. They went to check on the maid, and her flat was empty. All her belongings were gone. They called the cops, who came and had a brief look, not interested from what they said, and left saying the maid probably had something to do with it. And that's what everyone believed for a week. Until the dad returned the following weekend to try and change the locks, and etc., and all he brought their dogs along with them. Yep, you know it. One of the dogs started digging and found the maid buried in the backyard under a tarp they had to close the pool with. So the theory now is that whoever came in probably knew her, and she recognized them, and she had to go. It's a terrible loss for that woman, obviously, with her life, and the people that care about her. Seems to be some type of robbery gone wrong. At least whoever was receiving her body had some type of closure. In the 1990s, a nurse in New Jersey killed hundreds of hospital patients. Sometimes he would sneak into patients' rooms at night and inject them with fatal medication doses. Other times, he would put the medication into IV bags in the supply room, so they would kill whatever random patient they were given to later. He was accused several times. Some patients pointed him out before they died. Some staff thought he was creepy and dangerous and refused to work with him. He kept getting fired from hospitals, but the hospital managers knew that if he got arrested, they would be sued by the families of the patients he murdered. So they just fired him and didn't call the police. That happened at 12 different hospitals over the course of 16 years. Investigators believe he killed as many as 400 people. After he was arrested, he confessed to 40 murders. In 29 of them, he gave enough detail to be charged and pled guilty. He's linked to 300 plus more deaths than that, but details of those will probably never be known because so much information was lost over time or destroyed by the hospitals. There was an incident in Trinidad where some maintenance divers were removing a plug from an oil pipeline and were instantly sucked into it. One was able to escape, but the other 4 were trapped for days in a small oil-coated pipe for days with only small air pockets to breathe in before they died. Thinking about it in detail and imagining what it must have been like for them makes me extremely uncomfortable. When I was 17, I was hanging out with 2 friends, and they wanted to go smoke weed in the woods. I didn't feel like it, so I drove them and waited in the car. After a while, I was getting bored and decided to go meet them, but there were 4 paths going off in different directions, so I just took the biggest one. After walking for a few minutes in the pitch-black forest, before flashlights on phones, I came across this dip in the trail, and on the other side, a bench lightly visible due to the moonlight. On the bench is sitting a man, and another one is standing in front of him, but I can only make out silhouettes. Being sure these are my friends, I yell out to them before walking over. If you ever walked the woods at night, it's just an uneasy feeling all around, so I was cautious to begin with. Well, it turns out, just after yelling out to my friends, both silhouettes turned around towards me. Not a word, not a sound. The guy sitting down starts sprinting full effing speed toward me in complete silence. I got the absolute F out of there, sprinting also the other way and tripping over shit because I couldn't see anything. I finally get out and lock myself in my car, but I was really worried for my friends. Maybe a minute later, I see them both coming out of a completely different path. They also confirmed they never saw me or anyone else. My heart still sinks just thinking about that dude sprinting in silence. What the F was that shit? My college girlfriend called me one night. The Baton Rouge serial killer had been active a while, and she was being followed all over town and even after going in circles by a white truck, which the killer supposedly drove. She fit the victim profile. She was brunette, living in house sitting for her aunt, a wealthy neighborhood. My roommate and I drove over, and we filed in line behind her and the truck. She lived essentially on the LSU grounds, so I assumed it was a stupid student prank or something. She parks at her aunt's house, truck stop one house short of her aunt's, and will put it behind her. I explain I'm going to defuse the situation. Walk over to the truck. The FBI says the killer is a white guy. This man is African American. Explained no one is upset, but he's freaking out my girlfriend. He needs to leave. He looks side-eyed at me and drives off. I see the guy again a few months later on the cover of Baton Rouge paper. He's been arrested. He was the killer. Well, it's my story. When I was a little kid, 5 to 6, we had this neighbor like grandma to me. I'd go over and have snacks, and she had a Mr. Potato Head I played with that was her now adult son's toy. Weird core memories. He came home in his 20s from the army, I think. I don't remember much about him, but he asked about taking my older brother camping, but my mom said no. She had a weird feeling about him. Side note, we lived out in the country, not even a town, just place. There were no locked doors. Everyone trusted each other. My mom saw him at our little store with bee stings all over and was concerned. He said he got them at the creek. She thought that was weird because that's just not a thing where we went all the time, but okay. A little while later, not sure how long, the news said there was a murder of some campers out past where we lived. No leads. People were shocked. This doesn't happen here. My mom remembered her weird feeling, and the bee stings that make it didn't make sense. She called the police to say, hey, probably nothing, but here's what I got. I remember detectives coming to our house to talk to her. They had some other evidence that matched, but not enough to link him to the murder. A couple of their children. It's unsolved to this day, though the detective said he knew it was him. A few years later, the guy went to prison for an abduction or attempted murder of a woman who ran out of gas and offered her a ride. She lived, thank God. The other night, my wife took our child out for several hours. In that time, I wrapped up work, then left to get dinner around 4:30, got home around 6:30, played with our dog, and did a few chores. Then, when my wife got home around 7:30, we relaxed a bit, and I headed for bed about 9 p.m., usually up early with our kid. Maybe 2 minutes after crawling into bed, I get a text from my wife with a picture of our dry erase menu board on our fridge. See, usually at the start of the week, my wife will fill out a rough menu for dinners that week. I remember seeing it earlier in that day was filled out as expected. The picture she sent was of the full menu all scrambled up, like the letters were all moved everywhere with random words and squiggles throughout. Some of it was her writing, but others were incomplete words or rewritten words in handwriting that wasn't hers or mine. This freaked us out, as one of our 1-year-olds certainly didn't do it. The county sheriff showed up in the sweet house and found nothing. Nothing was out of place or missing either. He was spooked by it a bit too. He said they never get a call out in the country where we are recommended we change our locks. We hadn't, as the couple who bought our home were elderly, so we did that night. My high school girlfriend called late one night after I was home and in bed. She said that something had happened and asked if I could come over. She was clearly shaken, and not full details, so I told my parents and drove over to her house. At the top of her subdivision, I was met by a cop with lights on. He asked where I was going, and I told him about the call from my girlfriend. He lets me go by, and I come over the hill to the cul-de-sac where she lives, running out of her house, and meets me in the street. She explains that someone had broken into the house and headed to my girlfriend's house, where I know she started. They watch me pull up and get out of my car. My girlfriend comes running out of her house and meets me in the street. She explains that someone had broken into her neighbor's house and started beating her with something heavy. The neighbors managed to get out of the house and head to my girlfriend's house, where she started banging furiously on the front door. My girlfriend's dad was out of town, so her mom answered the door, and the neighbor just fell on the front door. My girlfriend's dad was out of town, so her mom answered the door, and the neighbor just fell into the foyer, bleeding profusely from the head. Her mom looks up and sees the attackers headed up the walkway toward the front door. She pulls the neighbor into the house and closes the door, hitting the attacker with it before it fully closed. He then took the heavy tool that he had used to beat the neighbors and demolish the llama window at the top door. Her mom started screaming, and the attacker just turned around and walked up the street into the darkness. I spent the night there that night, along with 2 or 3 cops outside in their cars, and in the morning we would see blood still pooled on the floor in the foyer and splattered blood above the front door from where the attacker had swung the bloody tool to smash the window. No one was ever caught or even identified. It was just completely random. The neighbor survived, and to my knowledge had no permanent physical injuries besides scarring from having her scalp stapled shut. She moved away shortly after the incident. I was around 10 years old. I was at school, but my mom told me she was thinking of taking me to the doctor's in the afternoon, recurring eye issue. Lunchtime, and I'm in the dining hall when the office woman told me there was a taxi outside for me and I needed to go. I assume my mom booked it for me, as she can't drive. I cleared up my stuff and got my bag. Just about to leave, when I remembered my jacket in my classroom. I rushed to get and head out for the taxi. Office woman tells me I'm too late, and the taxi had gone without me. I just went back to class, but panicking my mom would be angry at me. School finishes, and my mom is waiting for me at the gates. I burst into tears, apologizing for missing the taxi and thinking I was in big trouble. She never ordered a taxi and had no clue what I was talking about. She ended up not making the doctor's appointment. No one ever found out who ordered the taxi or who the driver was. My mom doesn't like to think that would ever happen if I had forgotten my jacket and ran my glasses. TL. DR. Missed the taxi I thought my mom booked for me, only to find out it could have been an attempted kidnapping.